Good evening, everybody. We're just waiting for a few more people just to come in, but thank you all very much for your time this evening. I will just kick off very shortly. Thanks for coming along after the delay from last week. I can't believe it was only last week that we had the public holiday. So I'll just wait for a couple more people to come in. It's good to see some familiar names in the chat in the room. Brilliant. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just, I'm conscious that it's your evening time we're taking up, but thank you very much for coming along this evening. And it's what was going to be one of the first sessions of British Rowing Coaching Week, but is actually the last session of British Rowing Coaching Week, which was last week, as I say, due to the unexpected public holiday that we had on Monday. So changing young lives through coaching is a topic that we as a coaching community have talked about for a long time, and we're delighted to be taking a kind of a big leap forwards really in understanding this area of work further. So just to briefly introduce myself, I'm Rachel Hooper. I'm Learning Education and Development Manager at British Rowing, and as part of my role I lead the GROW programme, which it's about developing coaches and community and outreach programmes. So we're also joined in the background by Sarah Harris, who's Head of Learning Education and Development, and also by Richard Sinnott of Warrington Youth Rowing, who's going to be joining in the conversation a little bit later after the main presentation. I'm really excited to introduce Scott Whitfield, who is a trainee sport and exercise psychologist at Liverpool John Moores University. He's already presented some of his work to a recent coach education course, which really challenged some new coaches to rethink the way that they can better engage and motivate young people in rowing. So before I hand over to him, if you do have any questions for Scott, either while he's presenting or at the end, or any thoughts that you have, or any insights, or any of your own experiences, please do share them. Pop them in the questions box, and I'll be able to keep an eye on those, and I'll interject at the right moment to feed them back to Scott so he can provide a little bit more feedback. So I won't take up any more of your time, and I will pass you over to Scott.
Cheers, Rachel. Can everybody, or can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, thanks for that. Thanks for the introduction there, Rachel. Normally I'd say nice to see you all, but I can't see anyone. But no, that's fine. We'll go with it. I'm sure it'll still be hopefully a good session for you to listen into. I appreciate you all joining. I know it's a Wednesday evening. Everyone's got busy lives, so I appreciate you coming here to listen to what I've got to say. It's quite nice for me, quite comforting to know that people want to hear about the research that I'm doing. And for myself, I've loved it. Sort of the past 18 months being involved. It's something which I never thought I'd sort of get into in terms of a research point of view, but no, something I've really enjoyed. Just to expand on what Rachel said there. So obviously my name's Scott Whitfield. I'm currently a trainee sport and exercise psychologist. So I'm about 18 months into doing my doctorate at John Moores University. Hopefully another 18 months to go until I'm finished, if all goes to plan and all the research comes off and everything. But no, really enjoying that. My background is in football. So as I was sort of getting more and more involved in rowing, it was quite nice for me to be a bit of an outsider. So what we did was conducted an evaluation of the Warrington Youth Rowing Programme. I appreciate some of you will know what that is, some of you may not. So in a moment I'll go over that in a little bit more detail. But yeah, for me as an outsider coming into that environment, having played football all my life, it was quite nice to come in and conduct the evaluation and actually for myself try to understand what was going on and the effect it was having on the young individuals, and come at it from a different angle. In sport everything's about performance, but it's a small percentage of individuals who actually make it to that top elite level. So looking at ways we can still actually maximize youth development, and the focus not always being on developing Olympic rowers, for example, was quite nice, and again something I've really enjoyed. Hopefully some of the things I talk about here you'll be able to latch onto and connect to and link it to your own context, whether you're a coach, a parent, I appreciate some of the things I'm talking about you may not have heard before or may not know anything about. So again, I'm going to try and make it relatable as possible, and hopefully again there's something there that you can latch onto and make sense. Again, any questions, feel free to fire them over to me at any point. And if anyone wants to get in touch at the end as well, I'm happy to sort of talk about it in a bit more detail with yourselves. So moving on, the outline of today's workshop is going to be in 4 parts. So like I said before, going to introduce a context, so what the Warrington Youth Project really is. I know Richard's on the call, so if I get that wrong and I don't do it justice in terms of what it is, then it'll be having a few choice words with myself. But no, I'm going to try and outline what the Rowing Project is, then talk about the findings. So I started the project early last year, and it's probably only a few months ago now that we actually sort of finished the evaluation phase of my research. So I'm going to outline those to you, and then how to use this knowledge. Again, so if you're coaches, parents, the whole purpose of research is to improve understanding, but then be able to apply this to a real world situation, a real world scenario. So for me, it's sort of how I'm using the knowledge we've acquired from the evaluation and actually then trying to implement that and put it into practice. And then I'm going to sort of try to talk about how you can use some of this information to inform your coaching. So as coaches, in whatever context that is that you're working in, hopefully there'll be some things that I talk about today. And again, I'm more than happy to meet or talk to some of you afterwards as well in terms of how does this translate to your context? How does this translate to the work that you're doing? Again, whether that's in a performance enhancement side of things, could we link in some of the sort of youth development work as well? That's the premise of today. So in terms of the context then, I think Rachel told me she actually took this picture. But I think that's such a nice image. That was taken in July this year, I think, at the regatta at Warrington Rowing Club there. That's an image of the regatta that day. You got the children there getting in the boats. But so basically, Warrington Youth Rowing Project is a project started in 2017 with, at its core, trying to make rowing accessible to populations who would never have the opportunity otherwise. Again, it's got this reputation of being a white middle class sport. So the premise of the project was to try and engage individuals who are perhaps disadvantaged, engaged in rowing and getting them involved. So what the project does is arrange weekly sessions to disadvantaged Year 8 students across the academic year. So these are pupil premium students who receive an allocation of funding from the government, and that money is provided to improve educational outcomes. So Warrington acquires this funding and organises sessions on a weekly basis from September up until June, July for the students, for them to engage in rowing. And again, that started in 2017, I believe. Obviously a difficult period through COVID, and now what we see it as today is it's expanded to Merseyside Youth Rowing, Northwich Youth Rowing, and Greater Manchester Youth Rowing. So there was encouragement, I think, from Henley to expand it because of the impact it was having on these young individuals who had never actually engaged or been a part of rowing before. Some of them probably never even knew what rowing was, or would laugh at you if you'd tried to encourage them to engage before. But no, so that's what Warrington Youth Rowing Project is. It organises its own regattas, so as you can see in the image there, and sort of organises its own competitions, takes part in, I believe there's one down in London, and engages in the online competitions with London Youth Rowing as well. Subsidises fees to help students join the rowing club if they wish. So I think that you've had a few examples there where students have gone to America, so have got involved in rowing through the project and gone on scholarships to America because they've loved it that much. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a broad insight into what Warrington Youth Rowing Project is. Again, and it's got its partners with Merseyside, Northwich and Greater Manchester. In terms of our findings then, so like I said, that started probably around summer last year. and finished just probably about a year or so, where we actually started talking to individuals to try and understand what impact this was having on the young individuals. So how was this affecting them? And these were the 4 things we found. So there were sport-specific outcomes. So ultimately, the students were learning to row. They were learning all the basic skills, all through to the technical skills and the more complex ones. So they're there for the whole academic year. So as we were talking to them, so I spoke to 40 students in a focus group, spoke to around 7 to 10 coaches, a few head teachers, a few assistant head teachers, a few teachers who take the students to the rowing project, and a few of the trustees at Warrington Rowing Club. And what we found are these outcomes. So yeah, sport specific, also some physical outcomes, as I'm sure you can imagine. So in terms of physical strength, coordination, balance, physical fitness, aerobic endurance. So they were, again, 2 interesting ones, but ones that we probably all knew that. And the interesting ones for me were the psychological and the social cultural outcomes, which really, again, being a trainee psychologist, really sort of stood out and gripped me in terms of how this was occurring. So just to elaborate, in terms of the psychological outcomes this was having on the individuals. So some of them spoke about how they've increased in confidence as a result of the program, resilience, concentration, their ability to problem solve, their empathy for other individuals, and also that they developed a sense of self and understanding and pride in themselves. Again, looking back at the context, these are individuals who perhaps had never had the opportunity to engage in extracurricular activities, in football, rugby, for example, because perhaps they're at a bit of a disadvantage, and it's difficult for them. So the fact they were able to engage in rowing, all of these outcomes were developing as a result of that engagement, work ethic, the ability to push themselves beyond the limits that they thought they could achieve. In one of the focus groups, where we had, I think, 6 young females, one of them spoke about her ability to regulate her emotions. So what I tried to do was get them to reflect on how they were as an individual in the September before they started, and then look back on their time and where they were at the time of doing the focus group. And she said, at the time when I started, maybe I was a bit snappy with people, and maybe I couldn't quite control my emotions, and I would let that affect me for the rest of the day. But being on the water and failing and having to overcome that, and being around teammates, it helped her to sort of almost recognize the emotions she was feeling, and then be able to sort of control them and regulate them in order to sort of optimize the functionality of the team. Another student, picking out confidence there, she noticed she realized she was quite sort of shy and anxious before the program. She would struggle to talk to individuals who she didn't know, who she didn't have a rapport with. And I said to her, if I came and spoke to you back in September, would you have been able to talk to me? And she said, probably not, to be honest. But the fact she was engaged in the rowing program, and she was forced to talk to people from different backgrounds, to peers who she'd never perhaps spoke to in school, because in the boat she had no option but to talk to her teammates. She said it almost broke that barrier, and forced her to be more confident and to voice her opinion, which was really nice. And then it was almost thinking about, okay, how can we use this skill moving forward? And she said, okay, maybe when I'm going into shops, I'm more confident talking to shop assistants, for example. And for me, it was really nice, because they were there to row, but there were these whole other skills and outcomes which were occurring as a result of this rowing program, which was really interesting. Helped them develop a sense of identity. Again, a lot of these individuals perhaps hadn't engaged in many sports before, so the fact they were there engaging in this rowing program, they developed a sense of identity as themselves as rowers. And they were part of the in-group, and everyone, when they went back to school, everyone wanted to ask them what it was like to be going on the rowing program. And again, that then fed into their sort of psychological well-being, and that sense of self-esteem and pride and worth in that they were part of this program. They were developing all these skills, and it's only a select few actually get to take part. So it was really nice to hear some of the stories that the individuals were sort of illustrating as we were talking about it. And then also the social cultural skills, so the teamwork, communication, leadership, having healthy relationships with individuals, so the coaches and the teachers and also their peers, having role models to look up to and aspire to. The program for me almost broadened their horizons and made them aware of what's possible. So using the example of the young female who went to America on a scholarship, without that engagement in rowing, perhaps she would never have realized what was possible, that she can go to another country across the other side of the world and take part in rowing and get paid to go to university and people to pay for her fee. So it was a term we named cultural capital. It broadened their horizons. It made them more worldlier. Whether that's the right term, I'm not sure whether that's even a word, but it was again so nice to hear them talk about these things and talk about how, for example, it was boys versus girls at the start and they would bicker, but come July, come June, they were all together and there was a group identity and they all had each other's backs. And something which stood out to me was I went to the Birchwood indoor rowing competition, and again, not seen that before. I was just there to sort of get a feel of what goes on, and it was like a festival atmosphere. It was unbelievable. You had Jess on the microphone cheering everyone on. You had the coaches cheering everyone on, but you also had the students having each other's back, cheering one another on. They all had their orange rowing tops on, so it was quite nice, really colourful, and it made me think back to my time at school. And it was very much boys versus girls. Boys were in one corner of the playground, girls were in one corner of the playground, and you didn't really mix. And that's the same when you go to parties at school and everything. But at Birchwood, there were 3 girls cheering on one boy when he was on the indoor rower. There were 4 boys cheering on one girl when she was competing, and it was just I'd never seen it before, and it made me think, so what's going on here? What exactly are the coaches doing to create this culture, to have this impact on the individuals? Because it doesn't happen naturally. They don't just develop leadership skills or know how to converse with people from different backgrounds. So there was something being done which was allowing them to develop these skills and actually develop their cultural capital. So that was there were the 4 outcomes. So you had the sport specific, physical, psychological, and social cultural. And what we could see from that were the students were developing life skills. These were skills: the teamwork, the communication, the leadership, the resilience. These aren't skills which are only useful in sport, but are skills that are applicable to all domains of life, whether that's back in school, whether that's when they go to university in a few years' time, whether it's in a working environment. These were skills which hopefully, and obviously that's the aim, that they can take throughout life with them. And again, like I said before, only a certain percentage of individuals will make it to the top level. But if we can provide a context and a culture which allows students to develop these skills and maximizes their development, then that's what sport's all about. We should be encouraging that even more. And that was my task, and that is my task. And as I'll talk about later on in this session, that's my task moving forward now, is how can we harness this? How can we apply this to different contexts? Or how can we develop these skills even more so that the students are aware that they're developing them and can apply them to different contexts? We also wanted to look at the hows and the whys. So like I said, they were developing these skills, but we would be negligent if we didn't look at how and why they were developing. So what specifically was the project doing to give the students a space to develop these skills? And we identified 3. So people were integral. The people involved in designing and implementing the project were crucial. Also the resources that were available and that the students had there, again, crucial. And the experiences they had. And again, I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail now. So the people then. And again, my idea of psychology is that we don't exist in a vacuum, and that these individuals are influenced by everything else going on around them. So at the center, you've got the young student, but you've got the coaches, the teachers, the trustees, the school, parents and peers, all operating around them in that same environment, which are influencing these young students. And what the Warrington Youth Rowing Project does is recognise that and tries to create that culture where it optimises their development. So the teachers were integral, ferrying them from school and back to the project, but getting involved. The relationships the students were able to build with the teachers, because it wasn't in a school environment, it was a different context, so it was a different relationship, and that power balance almost balanced out, so it wasn't teachers up here and students there, it was they were on the same level and they were able to build a better relationship. The Warrington Rowing Club trustees, obviously without them, the Warrington Youth Rowing Project wouldn't be a thing, so them organising, talking to different schools, trying to get them on board, they were crucial. The school itself, having buy-in from the school. These sessions take part sometimes of a Tuesday morning, for example, so the project is embedded into the curriculum. So without buy-in from the teachers in the school, there could be a bit of conflict there, but the schools were well up for it. They could see the value it was having and the benefits it was having on the young individuals, and without that buy-in from the teachers, who the student were taken out of geography, for example, without that student saying, actually, without the teacher, saying, yeah, that's fine, I can see that the value that the project is having on the individual, it wouldn't really be what it is. Hopefully I'm sort of articulating that well there. Parents, peers, sort of encouraging the students, and the coaches were everything, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail, which is hopefully why I'm here today talking to you coaches, because the coaches were central to everything that happened and the outcomes that were occurring. The amount of times that the students mentioned how important they were, and without the coaches, the project wouldn't be what it is. They wouldn't enjoy it as much. If I had £1 for every time they mentioned that, I'd be a rich man. So no, that they were everything. But it was buy-in from this whole social cultural environment around us, which made the project what it was, and which helped to create these outcomes. And also resources. There's not as many there, but having a kit. So I mentioned before, they all got an orange t-shirt. That drove that sense of identity, that self-worth, self-esteem, that pride in being involved in something. They were the rowing team. They were going back to school and everyone was talking to them, and that was quite interesting for me, hearing that without just a t-shirt, and again putting it into context, working with pupil premium individuals who perhaps don't always get new clothes and new shoes, but being given these tops, it helped to instill that sense of pride, and they would wear them proudly to school. And as you saw in the picture before, the amount of orange in that photo, that's all the students wearing their top, which again was interesting, but that contributed to the outcomes. Transport, without the minibuses and the vans to ship them to and from school, again, the project wouldn't be what it is. The opportunity to join the rowing club. So a lot of these individuals, some of them just were happy to take part and be involved. Some of them found themselves really good at it and sort of developed that appetite to want to row, like the girl who went to America. So without the opportunity to join the rowing club, it wouldn't have, again, had the same effect. But the fact that was there, and that Warrington subsidised fees, again, contributed to them wanting to progress, being more motivated because they want to go to the regattas and everything. So it's all of it tied together, really. And again, having enough equipment, to having enough life jackets, having enough boats. The last thing you'd want is Jack, Joe and George on the side waiting for the boat to come back because you've only got one. So it was having enough equipment there to get everybody involved. Even the teachers got involved and sometimes went out on the speedboat and everything with them. So again, that was something they loved, and everyone contributing and buying in together to create these outcomes. And lastly, experiences. Friendships are made through common experiences and memories. The shared journey, the fact that they were there in September and finished in June and July, and they can reflect back on where they were at the start. Some of the students told me they couldn't even swim and they were absolutely petrified, but they encouraged each other. They wanted each other to succeed, and they motivated each other. And it was the novel nature of rowing which also created these outcomes, in that a lot of the coaches and the head teachers mentioned how everyone was on a level playing field. You had some boys there giving it big times, because they're good at football or rugby, for example, but the fact they're on water and they're on a boat, it almost brought everyone's ego down, which meant everyone was on a level playing field, so everyone was able to grow and develop and achieve together, which almost created that culture. Yeah, the length of the program, the trips to new places, going down to London, going to Birchwood, taking part in these competitions, that it all collectively contributed to what the program was helping these individuals to achieve. So that's a broad summary of what we found. I've summed that up in 20 minutes or so, but it was a good few months work, like I said, talking to different people, trying to understand. And as I said before, me being an outsider and not actually knowing too much about rowing before, never participated in rowing, it was for me, okay, tell me what goes on here, tell me what's happening. And the main one were those life skills that they were able to develop. But also, again, it was for us thinking about, okay, so what specifically is being done. So I went away and started reflecting on it, and came up with these 3 sort of bullet points here, which really stood out to me. Like I said before, the coaches were integral. The coaches were everything to the program, whether it was the relationships that they were able to build with the students, which encouraged the students to want to come back. I had one young female tell me how she doesn't actually attend school. She hates school, but she turns up every Wednesday because that's when she goes rowing. And it was because of the relationship she was able to build with her peers and the coach that motivated her to want to turn up, to not want to let her team down. And it was the style of coaching delivery which really sort of stood out to me as well. At the start, it was quite sort of authoritative because they need to be kept safe, because some of them couldn't swim before, because they were on a boat on a river and there's a current and the wind can push them away. So at the start, it was quite directive. But as the coaches got to know the students, it almost became like a guided discovery. So more autonomy was provided to the students, and they were actually able to reflect on how to turn the boat, or what to do differently, or how to maximize the speed. So again, it was a shift and a recognition from the coaches. They were understanding the students. They were showing that contextual understanding, in that there's no need to be directive, but let's give them a bit of autonomy. And that coaching style contributed to the outcomes, to the mechanisms. Coaches were encouraging students to encourage each other. The coaches were encouraging the students, but yeah, they really wanted to create that culture and environment where they were a team and they weren't a bunch of individuals. And on a boat, in comparison to football or rugby, for example, individuals can get away with social loafing or not pulling their weight. Whereas in rowing, everyone in that boat needs to pull their weight. So there was a real sort of emphasis on coaches promoting that and wanting individuals to take ownership of their own development. The other one, and again, it ties into the coaches in that, like I mentioned before, that everyone acknowledged that we don't exist in a vacuum, that there's this whole social, cultural environment going on in the lives of these individuals, and coaches were there to sort of try to provide an environment which negated all the negative which was going on in these individuals' lives. And whilst they were at the rowing project, all they were there to do was focus on the rowing, and yeah, create an environment which was enjoyable for them. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. And also the fact of implicit and explicit learning, and I'll just sort of briefly touch on that now. The life skills were taught quite implicitly, so the students actually didn't realize they were developing these life skills of the teamwork, the resilience, the communication, until we were in the focus groups and they actually reflected on, oh yeah, I can regulate my emotions now, I can control myself a bit more, I am confident, I can talk to you now, whereas before I'd be a bit shy. So it was, at the minute, that the skills are taught implicitly, and for me it was about reflecting on, okay, can this become more explicit? Can we try to make the students more aware that they're developing these skills? So this is the image I sort of created there, very basic, and that represents the sort of we don't exist in a vacuum model. Like you can see, you've got the student in the middle there, but there's this whole environment going on around us which has potential to impact them. And some of the students mentioned how they were having a difficult time at home, they were having a difficult time with their peers at school, they were having a difficult time with their family, for example, but the coaches recognize that in order to facilitate their development, we need to create an environment here which optimizes it, which is optimal for them, where they can forget about their problems and they just enjoy it, and they can grow as people, and they can learn to row. Again, that ties back into how important coaches were. And that quote on the left hand side is one my supervisor told me a few years ago. Obviously, as a psychologist, we need to understand what it's like to walk in the shoes of those people we're trying to support. And that's something the coaches did, perhaps without even realizing. They really got to know these individuals, not just at the rowing level where they were coaching them, but they got to know them as people. They were invested in them. They were interested in learning about what was going on for them at home, at school, and how to help them. And it made the students feel valued. And then touching on the implicit, explicit learning, like I mentioned before. So when I was speaking to the coaches, the focus predominantly was teaching the students how to row. And that development of life skills was almost outside the awareness of students and coaches. So the focus was, okay, let's teach them the basics of rowing and let's progress it, and then begin to teach them race and starts, and then they go to the regattas. So those psychological and social cultural outcomes were almost a byproduct to the involvement in the program. And it was only when students and coaches reflected on their experience and their time as part of the rowing project that they realized the students were actually developing these skills. And it was almost, oh yeah, actually, I've never tried to help them develop teamwork, or I've never tried to make them more resilient, but it's just happened as a result of being involved in the program and how the coaches were delivering the sessions. So those were the ones that stood out to me and made me think, would we be able to generate greater outcomes if the life skills were taught explicitly? So rather than it being very implicit and they're teaching them to row, could we shift the focus almost and still try to help them row, because that's what they're there for, it's a rowing project, but could we try to feed something different into the sessions where they begin to talk about life skills a bit more and say, okay, you've just been a cox today. What skills have you been able to develop there? And maybe it's leadership or communication. Making the student more aware of that, and then saying, okay, why is that skill important? How can that be used in other contexts? By them actually reflecting on that, they're more likely to be able to recognize that they've got that skill and apply that to different domains and different aspects of their life, and take it back to the classroom or take it into work experience, for example. So that was something which was really interesting, and something which is, like I'm going to talk about in a minute, fueled my interest to sort of work with the coaches a little bit closer. Now I realise I've spoke for half an hour there. So does anyone have any questions? Obviously, I don't want to just talk to you for an hour, so I want to provide as much sort of scope as possible for you to ask questions. There may be some things there which didn't really make sense, so sort of the floor is yours for the next few minutes if you want.
Scott, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, so I have, sorry, I'm just trying to get this icon to work. Not that everybody wants to see me. I think you might be able to see me if I do that one. There we go. Brilliant. So one of the questions that I've had is around whether or not, so sorry, just let me bring this up. So how can we use rowing to develop life skills when people barely have the support and confidence to stay in school? Has there been any sort of link with people developing their life skills in sport as a result, and as a result they've developed their confidence in school as well?
Yeah, I mean, I'm almost going to sort of sit on the fence there, because that's what I'm going to talk about in a minute, but that was it. It's sort of, how can we, for us, and hopefully I'm alluding to the same thing here, is for us making it more explicit that they're aware they're developing these skills. And then through doing that, through allowing the students to become more aware that they're developing the skills, they're more likely, and what the research says and what I'm going to talk about in a minute, they're more likely to be able to apply these skills in school, for example. So it's, for example, if someone has developed resilience, if we can make them aware, if using the Warrington Youth for Our Own project as a context, if we can earlier on make them aware that they're developing resilience rather than a year down the line, they're more able to acknowledge that. And if we can then have the conversations with them about, okay, why is resilience important? What other, okay, it's important in sport because you've got to push yourself and you've got to sort of overcome setbacks and failure, but where else can it be applied? And it's almost putting the ownership back on the student to reflect on, okay, yeah, I've got this skill here. Could I use it in school? And then it's up to the coach to talk about, okay, yeah, resilience in school. What does that look like when you're doing your GCSEs, for example, and you feel like giving up, or when you're doing your A levels and you're facing a tough time and you're coming home from school and you're tired and you don't really want to do it. It's talking about, okay, could we use this skill in that context? And again, that's what I'm going to talk about in a minute, and that's hopefully where I'm going with my research at the next phase, is hopefully working a bit more aligned with the coaches at Warrington, and if anyone here feels like that may be useful for them. I hope that answered the question. Whether it has or not, I'm not sure, but hopefully that's again what I'm going to talk about in a minute. Hopefully that was almost useful. It's making it a bit more explicit so the students are aware that they've got this skill, because when we were interviewing them for the project, they weren't aware. And it was like, well, what's the point? Because they don't know they've got it, so they're not going to use the skill. That makes sense.
Thanks for that, Scott. So I've got a couple more questions. So how did the young people react to being, in inverted commas, guinea pigs with your research?
Good question. I mean, I don't think we asked them how. Again, we obviously got consent from them. We explained what the project was. We explained why we were doing it, and we almost termed it as that. By doing this project, we're almost looking at ways to improve the program to help you in the future. Again, yeah, guinea pigs, yeah, good term. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, just to add on to that, just in terms of your focus groups, what did that look like? Was it a session down at the boathouse? Was it a large group? Was it a small group? How did those work?
Yes, so we split it into groups of fives or six, so boys and girls. We did everything to try and make it as comfortable for them as possible. So we went down to Warrington to interview them. We made sure they were aware that everything was confidential and anonymous, so that anything that they said when I'm writing up my research, no one will know it's them. No one will know it's them who said that. Richard came up with a good idea of offering biscuits out, so I brought biscuits along. We again tried to make them as comfortable as possible, and it was again quite nice for me because I'm not a rower. I've not much experience in rowing. I just sat down with them and I explained what I was doing. As you can probably tell from the way I talk, I'm not the most formal person anyway. I'm sort of quite a laid-back conversational approach. So it was almost trying to make them feel comfortable and saying, okay, I'm just trying to find out what your experience has been like so we can try to improve it in the future. Yeah, and that was it. It was yeah, small groups and some. It was quite awkward at the start for some of them. Because it can be awkward talking to a stranger, but by the end, one sticks out. By the end, I couldn't stop them talking, and they were like, bloody hell, I've not even realised we've got the recorder here anymore. I'm just talking to you like it's a normal conversation. So everything was about trying to get them to feel comfortable, because when you do that, they're more likely to open up and give you a true account of their experiences and what the program was like for them.
Yeah. That's really great. I think I have got another one, but I'm going to wait until the end for that because I think it fits in quite nicely just to sort of as part of the conclusion. So I'm going to let you get on with the next section.
Okay, yeah, thanks for those questions as well. So again, how can we use this knowledge then? So we've got it, and like I said at the start, research is all about advancing knowledge. So that's what we've done to a degree already. We've advanced knowledge. We know the outcomes and the mechanisms behind their own project. And now for me, the task is, okay, how can we implement this to improve the project to a real life situation? And what sprung to mind was a talk I had by a fellow called Dan Gould. So he's American. It was at a John Moore's almost conference a year or so ago, and he looks a lot in terms of leadership and how we can develop leaders in high school captains. So what he found, he did an initial study, and he found that high school captains were struggling in terms of their leadership role. So that they almost felt like they weren't prepared. So they showed some leadership qualities and were then thrust into these leadership roles, but they weren't actually told how to lead or given enough opportunities to practice leading. So the coaches were almost taking it upon themselves to do team talks, and all the coach was doing was doing the coin toss at the start, for example. So the development of their leadership skills, which again is another life skill, was inhibited. So what he did is he came up with this training program, which is the longest name, the Michigan High School Athletic Association Captains Leadership Training Program. So he came up with this. I think it was ran over 5 years, and the purpose was to teach future and current captains how to be effective leaders in sport. So they had 2 blocks of sessions where they gave these leaders individuals to lead. They would speak amongst themselves about difficult leadership situations they've encountered and how they navigated them. And what they found is the participants enjoyed the program and they found it helpful in relation to their captaincy roles. So again, like I mentioned before, they made the process more explicit. They started talking about leadership and what leadership was like in the real world, and how they could apply their leadership qualities to their team and how they would deal with these situations. So before that, it was perhaps quite implicit. Oh yeah, you're a leader, go and lead the team, but they didn't know how. They'd no practice or deliberate practice in actually being a leader. So making it more explicit by doing perhaps an education or development program with the captains, they actually found themselves more comfortable in their role and better able to lead. So in terms of ideas for the future, they recommended working closely with coaches and helping coaches teach leadership skills to athletes. So that was again like a light bulb moment for me, and thought, right, I can do this with Warrington. So my plan is to, like I've already said, make the implicit explicit. So I went away and sort of did a bit of research on this and saw the quote, or heard the quote, skills are taught, not caught. And that resonated, that sort of summed it up. These skills need to be taught to the young individuals. For them to be able to apply them to school, to work, to university, we actively need to teach them. So if you look at the red line there, underneath the red line, this is everything Warrington are doing at the minute. They're modeling positive behaviors, like we already spoke about. They're fostering positive relationships. So the coaches are building relationships with the individuals. They're providing a culture and an environment which is allowing the students to develop these life skills. But for us to maximize that, life skill development can only go so far up to the red line if it's implicit. To maximize that, we need to make it more explicit. So we need to start discussing life skills with the young individuals, defining what they are. So what does resilience mean? What is communication? What are communication skills? How can they be applied in sport, in school? They then need to be given the opportunity to practice these life skills. So like in that slide before where I spoke about in America, the Michigan School Captains Leadership Program, they were given the opportunity to start practicing life skills. Once they've got that, then the onus is then on the coach to start talking about where it can be transferred, and give the students the confidence to be able to transfer this skill that they've learned in sport, because sport is an unbelievable environment to learn these skills, because you're challenged every day. And then it's about the students practicing this transfer, and that's what I'm almost going to start trying to do with the coaches at Warrington. Is they weren't aware that they were helping the students develop these skills. So for the next academic year, and again, I've spoke to Richard about this, it's, can we make it more explicit? So can we start having conversations with the students about these skills that they're developing? And once they're aware and can reflect on these skills, can we then sort of try to help them transfer these skills to other domains. And that's difficult because ultimately they're there to row. And a lot of the students said to me, if we just turn up to a session and said, right, today it's on teamwork, they wouldn't enjoy it as much. They want to row, but we can be quite clever. And if at the end of the session, for example, like I used the example there before, with a coach and someone's been coxing, for example, it's okay. You were a cox today. How did you find it? What skills did you develop? What skills did you have to draw upon? And with a bit of encouragement, hopefully the students can pick up on being a leader, being a good communicator. And it's like, okay, so where else do we need to be a good communicator? Oh, in school, when I'm with my family, for example. And it's about making it more explicit and allowing them or providing them the environment to reflect on it and then start practicing these. So that's the implicit explicit approach, and that's something that I'm going to sort of strive to do moving forward, and that's my next sort of phase of research. And then there's something also on transformational leadership, which I'm not sure if everyone's heard of this. It's almost a sort of a different style of leadership, and some of the coaches at Warrington were already demonstrating these skills. And for me, it's about helping them to become transformational leaders, which is quite a posh term, but it's almost a person-centered leadership approach. It's about empowering, inspiring, and challenging participants, which they're already doing. It's about sort of trying to get them to put ownership on the students to take initiative and take ownership of their development. Again, making it more explicit. And this style of leadership is away from your traditional style of leadership, which is based on reward and punishment. So someone does something good, you give them a reward for it, you give them a positive praise, and that's more likely to make them want to do it again. Transformational leadership is almost different because the power balance, again, is you're more equal as individuals. And the research has found that transformational leadership increases motivation, increases effort, increases team cohesion and well-being in the individuals. So again, that's something that I'm going to start trying to implement at Warrington and wherever else. It's trying to help leaders become transformational leadership, and that's not something easy. But again, it's something we can sort of try to develop over time. And for me, it's about raising coaches' awareness of their own practices and what they're doing, and how we can use these theories to apply it to their own world, because that's what research is about. So there's 4 characteristics of transformational leadership, and I wish they were given easier names. So you've got individualized influence, inspirational motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. Again, I wish they were a lot easier and self-explanatory, but they're not. But ultimately, transformational leadership is about these 4 characteristics. If you yourselves as coaches can integrate these 4 characteristics into your own practices as coaches, then you're more likely to be able to increase your athletes' motivation, your team cohesion, the effort. So idealized influence is about sort of instilling value and meaning into activities. So it's about discussing personal values with athletes and almost sort of trying to instill that sense of honesty, integrity, encouraging fair play and sort of fair and trusting relationships with group members. And again, that's something the Warrington coaches do actually do really well. The next one is inspirational motivation, and it's having high expectations for athletes. And by having high expectations and showing enthusiasm in their abilities and showing that you believe in them, which again, a lot of the coaches at Warrington do already, supporting them to set challenging goals, they're more likely to be motivated and inspired to push themselves. If you've got a coach there who's putting them down and doesn't really show much belief in their ability, how likely are they to want to persist when the going gets tough? So that's all about motivating them. The next one is intellectual stimulation. So it's about giving students autonomy, or athletes autonomy, to offering them choice and encouraging athletes. For myself as a psychologist, it's about sort of developing thinkers and critical thinkers. Professional footballers, for example, are given everything, so they don't have to think. They've got a dietitian who cooks their food. They've got a kit man who gives them their kit. They've got a coach who designs their practices for them. Where it's about challenging students to reflect on what they're doing within sessions and giving them the opportunity to make decision making, to take on decisions, and to contribute new ideas. So you're almost empowering them. And the last one is individualized consideration. And again, this comes back to the people existing not just in a vacuum, but in a complex environment. And what the coaches did at Warrington was that they did show an interest in the individuals. So if you've got athletes there, they're a person first and an athlete second. So if you can almost show an interest in them as a person, and adapt your practices to suit their needs, and show some effort to discuss their lives outside of sport, because they may have some difficulties in family and in school and with their peers, and these young individuals are going through a lot. So if as coaches we can make them feel supported and do what we can to create a positive environment around them, that's only going to sort of serve them well moving forward. So again, that's something that I'm going to try and sort of start working with coaches in helping them to become transformational sort of leaders within their practices. Now I was linking it to you, and I know I've probably rambled on a bit, so I'm not sure how sort of tight we are for time. But the task now was sort of trying to get you to think about, okay, based on the things we spoke about, so the implicit and explicit learning, and also the transformational leadership characteristics, it's thinking about how much do you sort of work towards these within your coaching practices. So I've got 4 sets of questions there, which are all color coded based on the 4 characteristics. And I'll leave it to you, Rachel, whether we do this now or whether it's just something for you to ponder as coaches. But think about what your coaching philosophy is. How do you coach? Are your sessions performance focused or personal development focused? So life skills, could you focus on both? And what values do you strive to instill in athletes? Do you involve athletes in their own learning? How much choice are they given, or do you make all the decisions? And also, are they aware of their strengths or areas for development? So again, trying to get them to reflect on that. Are they aware of their own or their team's goals? Do you show belief and enthusiasm in regards to their abilities? And how much emphasis do you place on building relationships with the athletes you coach? How much do you know about their lives outside of sport, or is it very much rowing focused and that's it? How could you involve parents? And again, that alludes back to that whole social cultural environment. Again, how we navigate this next phase of the session is up to you, Rachel. Whether again it's just something for those here today to think about, and maybe if you want to take a picture of those and reflect on them in your own time, or equally, I'm happy to talk about them now.
Yeah, Scott, I think if you can leave those up for people to sort of digest at the moment. If I can bring in Richard just to get his thoughts on you know what your research has done in terms of Richard, if you want to come off mute and not onto video, that would be amazing, if you can. Oh, he's making progress, which is great. Just in terms of how it's informed the way that he's developing the coaches that are working on the youth programs, because one thing that is fantastic with the Warrington Youth Rowing and the other Northwest programs is that it really does help to develop coaches, and the support that they're given within the programs is great. Some are teachers, some are specific rowing coaches, or some are from other environments as well. So Richard, are you able to come on to your... I'll put that on. There you go. There you are. Marvelous. Do you want to just share some of your insight and thoughts on sort of how Scott's research has helped you to start to develop and maybe change a little bit of the way that people are coaching within the programs? Yeah,
thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Scott. Famous orange T-shirt. I think Scott's involvement in this has been quite revealing, really, because listening to the to the talk that we've had tonight, I'm wondering where we've got all these coaches from, because they sound like an elite squadron of the SAS or something. But I think the way that we run the operation, we tend to have coaches from 2 age levels, either people at the end of their profession, well, end of their careers or beginning of their careers. So we typically have a lot of people approaching retirement or even in retirement, and a lot of people around the university age. And I think that mix is something that is quite integral in the way that the youngsters possibly learn off the older coaches that we have, a lot of them tend to be ex-teachers as well. So these skills that Scott's highlighting, and I think it's in a lot of ways, I'm looking forward to working further with Scott on the things that he's talking about, trying to make the coaches aware that they are doing, and bring out these skills and encourage the skills to be used within the learning environment, to prepare our strapline is to enhance young lives through the power of rowing. So I think Scott's almost taken that. Sorry, Scott's almost taken that line and shown us how we are actually doing it and explained it, because we're doing a lot, as Scott says, we're doing a lot of these things, and I would challenge any of our coaches to say that they're actually doing it. We don't realize we're doing it, and we can do it better, which is, I think, the really interesting thing that Scott's saying. With a little bit of guidance, we can enhance all these skills, and I think it's a really valuable input. And analysing your own coaching, I think, is very important. Analysing what you do, and I like to think I do it, albeit I do it sort of sat in a traffic jam somewhere, thinking about, I wonder how we could do that better. I wonder, what we should have done there. How did we do that? Did we do this well? Did we not do that well? But I think that's a really important skill and something that we should be doing. And Scott's work's just sort of illustrating that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have got a few questions coming through, and I think it's probably a combo between Scott and Richard, to be honest, some of the answers. So one of them, which is quite an interesting one actually, is there a major difference between indoor rowing and outdoor rowing in terms of developing life skills? Any thoughts?
I would say yes.
Okay, I mean, interestingly, one of the sort of USPs that was directed to me was that there's nowhere to go on a river when you're sat in a boat. So I don't know if that's your thought as well, Richard.
I think they both teach different sets of, probably different sets of skills. I think the resilience factor, I think, comes in a lot more with outdoor, because you've got things like climate, much more, the teamwork, climates, sitting around waiting for things, having to have the discipline of being in a boat and a crew. There are things you can't do in a boat that you could probably get away with indoors, and the indoor environment is probably easier to, in some ways, is easier to organise, easier to work. But my view, I would always back the outdoor. I don't know what Scott's views on that are.
Yeah, probably echoing that. I mean, yeah, the majority of, well, I suppose it's a nice mix because they have the gym sessions as well, don't they, as part of the project. So sometimes they're out on the water, which again, the students say they enjoy because they're out in nature. They've got somewhere to go. Sometimes they struggle when it's on a rowing machine, but no, I think both help them to develop life skills. But no, we didn't sort of specify that in the focus groups. We never sort of nailed down on what skill, what environment, indoor or outdoor, helps you develop these more, because it was only at that point that they were even realizing they were developing the life skills. But no, interesting question. Yeah.
I think one little anecdote on that is I was out in a launch when we very first started, or we first started taking children out, and I was out with a school head, and I'll shorten the story a little bit, but we were behind a quad, and one of the youngsters in the quad trapped his thumbs in between the blades in the recovery going forward, and he started to kick off, and he was moaning, and he just shouted to me, sir, I've hurt my thumb. I've really hurt my thumb. And I just said to him, you'll be all right, son, you've got two thumbs, just get on with it. And he did have to get on with it. And afterwards, the head teacher said to me, well, I thought I'd handled it really badly on reflection, and I was expecting to be read the riot act by the head teacher. But he actually said to me, he said, in that instance, he said, I got it. I understood what you're doing. He said, because that child in a classroom would have kicked off he would have run around, he'd have gone out, we'd have had to have pastoral care in, he'd been up and down the corridor, he'd have been blowing his top, and he had nowhere to go. He couldn't do anything. He just had to get on with it. And that's I would say, is one of the advantages of being outside.
So yeah, it feeds into what I mentioned before, in that it's the novel nature of rowing. And that was one thing I asked a lot of them, is if this was a football project or a cricket project, would it instill the same life skills? And a lot of them were like, no, it's because you're on a boat, because you're out there on the water, they can't just get off and leave, whereas they probably could if they're indoors. But because they're out there, they have to deal with it. They have to talk to the mates to navigate around the river. They're forced to develop these skills because of the nature of rowing and what it is, and because they've never done it before. Whereas in other sports, because they perhaps have, the life skill development probably isn't as great as it is in rowing, which is something interesting that I've sort of remembered as you were talking there, Richard.
That's great, thanks, Scott. And I think that well, I'm just conscious of time because we're supposed to be just wrapping up. That was just linking to one of the questions that came through, was, are there any USPs linked to rowing compared to other sports? And I'd concur on that as well, having coached through a number of sports and with Warrington Youth Rowing and other youth rowing programs, that when you sat in the boat, there is absolutely nowhere to go when you're having to deal with your emotions. You have to deal with them with the people around you. And I think that, again, that links to the life skills, that if you've got friends in the boat, or even people who aren't friends necessarily, but just people who can help you work through those emotions and those frustrations and everything else that goes with it. So yeah, I think I have got a couple more questions, and I'm going to ask Scott to respond to those just slightly separately, because you're going to do a follow-up piece for us, Scott, aren't you, and just write up some a little bit more about your research, which is really helpful. Before we sign off, I want to give a shout out to Scott and Richard. Well, first off, Scott is going to be speaking at a conference next Friday, which is the Rocking the Boat conference, which is a fantastic conference which the Henley Stewards Charitable Trust are hosting. So if you just Google that or have a look on the on social media, there's quite a lot about it. Richard, you just want to give us a 30-second sort of overview of everything else that's going on that, and then we'll sign off.
Yeah, the Rocking the Boat, it's a week on Friday. It's a conference organised by London Youth Rowing, Warrington Youth Rowing and Henley Stewards Charitable Trust. And there's a really class field of speakers on the day. It starts at 9:30 with a welcome by Sir Steve Redgrave. And then Scott's talking in the morning, and we've got the chair of the Onside Youth Zone speaking. We've got a session on fundraising for outreach schemes, and then we've got something that'll be really interesting, a session from one of the organisers of the community rowing scheme in Boston, USA, and they do things in quite a remarkable, typical American way, shall we say, and I think that will pin back a few ears and be a bit of an eye-opener. I'm really looking forward to hearing that. It's free. Sign up. It's free. It's over the web, so you can dip in and out all day. If you go to Henley Royal Regatta website, look for the Charitable Trust. The sign up is on there.
Brilliant, thanks, Richard. I've been in a session about the community rowing in Boston, and it's on a monumental scale, which is really impressive. So yeah, it's always worth getting some new ideas on that one. So thank you all very much for your time. If I haven't got around to your question, you will get an answer to it, and we'll do a follow-up, as I say. But really appreciate your time. I think we've got some really strong foundations to build on, changing and shifting the way and that we develop coaches, and the way that coaches can support young people into rowing and through the rowing programs that are developing across the country as well, which is fantastic. So thank you, Scott, for your time. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Richard, for your input as well. And thank you, everybody else. And it's not Bake Off tonight, is it? It was last night. So enjoy, and we'll catch you on Friday, next Friday at the conference. And but if you have any follow-up questions, then feel free to get in touch as well. Thank you very much for your time.